So I wanted to give you guys some understanding of what it's like to own an Automower in the real world. I bought a Husqvarna 315X model Automower. It is designed to cover about 0.4 acres of a yard. So this is part of my backyard here, and then it goes down this way and then around to the front of the house where there's another section of yard. There's the Automower right there, it's running right now. Then it goes around up this way toward a little bit of the front of the house. So this particular yard is, it has a relatively bumpy surface, and it's, highly topographic. Like you can see here how the yard really slopes off, and even like beyond what you see as the horizon, it gets really steep after that. And then the yard goes uphill this way, and then it slopes down this way, and there's all kinds of, bumps on the surface. It's not a perfectly smooth surface. There are various obstacles, trees, a rose garden, all this stuff. So this is more of a real world assessment of, how an Automower would actually do in a real yard. If you look at the commercials for these kinds of Automowers, they assume that you have a perfectly flat yard with perfect grass and there's no bumps or anything. And, in those cases, obviously it's a lot easier to run an Automower. So overall, I'd say this mower does a pretty good job. But it's not perfect, right? There are some things you do have to deal with. So what I'll do is go over mainly what are the things you should look out for with this kind of an Automower, because all the main features, and all the things that they market to you for these things, you can find those in other videos. So the first thing is the installation. And to install the Automower, you first have to install a boundary wire around the entire perimeter of the yard. And you can get different installation kits from Husqvarna for these Automowers. You can get a small, a medium, or a large installation kit. And they basically come with different lengths of boundary wire and a different number of staples for you to staple the wire into the ground. So I bought the medium installation kit, which is designed for about a 0.4 acre yard. So it should cover all of this area. And with that, you get, I think, 850 feet or something like that of boundary wire. And I think about how many staples? 400 or 500 staples, something like that. And it turns out that may be adequate if you have a 0.4 acre yard without too many obstacles. But if you have I have 1, 2, 3 trees, plus this rose garden, plus this big fat tree over here that I have to set up loops around, or little island loops around, so that the Automower knows to avoid this without actually crashing into it. That takes extra length of wire. So what I actually needed was about 1,100 feet of wire total to put down all around the perimeter and all around the main obstacles in the yard. So if you have a yard that looks kind of like this, get the large installation kit. I think that comes with 1,100 or 1,200 feet of wire. That should be about right. The other thing is the actual staples themselves. So what the manual will tell you, you can see here, this is part of the boundary wire, is that you use a staple to basically press the wire or hold it into the ground once every 2 feet. And that's sort of the standard spacing between the staples in the instruction manual. That only really works if you have a perfectly flat yard with no bumps or anything. But if there are bumps and undulations in the yard surface, then you're going to need more staples per foot than you typically would per the manual. So even though I had from the installation kit, I think it was 500 staples, something like that, I needed more than that. I needed an extra 100 to 200 staples just to be able to make sure I can put the wire down and not have too much wire kind of hanging loosely that could get cut by the Automower. So again, the large installation kit has a couple, 200 or so more extra staples, so that would have been actually perfect, even though that installation kit is rated for a larger yard than this. So get more staples, get longer wire, and also, by the way, that extra number of staples also includes the fact that I had to bury the wire in certain parts of the yard. So if you're burying the wire everywhere, then you don't need to worry about staples. But I buried the wire, along this edge of the yard here, and along part of this edge of the yard here, basically to save on how many staples I would need. I also buried the guide wire as well, again to save on staples. And what the guide wire does is it allows you to link the charging station to some other part of the yard to make it easier for the mower to get to that part of the yard from time to time. Like, it's not like 20% of the time it'll use a guide wire to go out to that section of the yard, and then it'll mow there. And also when the mower is done mowing and the battery needs to be charged, it will try to find the guide wire and then use a guide wire on the way back to the charging station. So the guide wire, I had it buried, well, I buried it by hand from here all the way around the back of the rose garden and out to that bush over there at the edge of the yard. Doing it by hand is a lot of work, but it's certainly cheaper to do that, with a spade than by buying or renting a machine to do it. The other thing you have to bear in mind is that the charging station itself cannot be exposed to the elements. So what some people do is they'll get a little doghouse and they'll put the charging station in there. I don't have a doghouse, so I basically just made this little mat here, and I routed the wires, the 2 boundary wires and then the center guide wire up over the mat. I kind of wove it through the mat so the wires don't get loose. And then this section here is about 8 feet. It goes 8 feet back. Here's the charging station, and this is in my back patio. So basically, the patio kind of acts like a doghouse. So when the mower is parked there and charging, no matter how much it's raining or no matter how hard it's raining, it never gets wet. Okay, so make sure you can find a section of the yard where you can, put something like this or a doghouse or whatever, so it never gets wet when it has to charge. The mower is rated to be able to mow in the rain, but really it does an okay job with that. When the grass is wet, it doesn't have as much traction. So you may find that parts of the yard where the mower does not get stuck when it's dry, it will get stuck when it's wet because it's just a looser surface and it doesn't have as much grip. Okay, and I installed all the boundary wire and the guide wire about a month and a half ago, I think, and I've been making adjustments to it about every week since, primarily on this side of the yard here. This has been the biggest trouble section for me because the yard slopes down pretty steeply right here around this edge, and that is a larger grading than what the mower is rated for. The 315X in particular from Husqvarna is rated to cover up to a 15% grade. And right about here, from here going forward, this grading is very likely more than 15%. So I initially set it up intentionally to force it to cover this higher graded region just to see how it would do. And it did okay, but it would get stuck a lot, like pretty much every night, multiple times a night, because I have this running usually overnight through the morning. It would get stuck all the time. So I had to take the wire out. I had buried it along this entire strip, so I had to unbury it and then move the boundary wire back a bit to see how it would do covering less of a grade. And I just used more ground staples to staple those in, and it's doing better now. But then it is still getting stuck from time to time, so I have to take that wire, move it back a little bit more, and also try to cover or go around some sections that it's really having trouble with. So for instance, like you can see where these brown spots are, that's where it would get stuck a lot. This spot here, I originally tried to fill it with dirt to flatten it out because it was getting stuck there because it was kind of a ditch. So I figured, okay, if I fill the ditch with dirt and I make it flat, that one and that one over there and this one over here, maybe that would give it an easier time trying to find traction without like tipping over or anything. And it worked for this section here, but for these two it was still too steep, so I just had to pull the boundary wire back. And over here you can see the dirt's really kind of beaten up because when the mower is in a spot where it's having trouble backing up from the boundary wire, so the boundary wire might be say here, and if it hits the boundary wire and it tries to back up, it's going to keep spinning its wheels regardless of whether it has traction or not. So it's really going to tear up your ground if you put it in a place where it's going to have difficulty finding traction. Okay, so I'm not too worried about this. I can graft some grass from other parts of the yard over, and this will repair itself over time. But just watch out for that. If you really care about your lawn surface, make sure to set the boundary wire a little bit conservatively so you're absolutely certain that it's not going to get stuck or start spinning its wheels to get, to try to get out of its little predicament. One thing that the mower could benefit from with respect to that is better tires. So this particular Automower has, rather large rear wheels and little small front wheels. So it's a rear wheel drive setup, and I think it has either one motor for the rear or maybe two. I'm not sure. I think it's two because it has to steer. But the actual tires themselves, the knobs on the tires are not that deep. So it doesn't have much tread in order to really dig into the dirt. I think Husqvarna does sell upgraded tires. So if you need something a little knobbier to handle your lawn surface, I think you can get that. But right now I'm just using the stock setup, if you will. So those are kind of the main things to be aware of. The actual amount of boundary wire that you'll need for your yard is very likely more than what the manufacturer tells you, because they're basically assuming that you have a nice flat yard with, a minimum number of obstacles to route your wire around. And the same thing with the staples, right? You're very likely going to need more staples if you have a more realistic yard like this, because this yard is a little bumpy, right? So you're going to need more staples to cover all those little bumps and undulations so the wire isn't floating over those bumps. So those are kind of the, I wouldn't say frustrations, but those are the real world, things you have to deal with here. And it looks like it's done, so it's a perfect opportunity to see it find the charging station and park itself to charge. Overall though, despite those problems, I really do like this because it's saving a lot of time, right? To do this entire yard, I'd have to do it by hand with my push mower, which is also an electric mower, but it takes me, a couple of hours because I might have to use 2 full charges of a battery on that mower. And, in the middle of July in hot weather, this is a real pain. So this is a real lifesaver in terms of time. I set it up to run overnight so that when it's cooler, so it doesn't stress the battery out too much. And it does a great job. It really does a nice job keeping the lawn nice and thin, which is another point, by the way. The height settings for the mower, for this particular one, are here. This is the 315X has a manually adjustable height. I think the 450X, you can adjust it electronically. But either way, I'm running the dial at 7, and there's 8 total settings on the dial, so that the thickest grass is 8. Even at 7, the grass is, relatively thin. So I can't imagine a scenario where you want to run that dial any lower than 7, because this grass is already pretty thin. So also something to consider, it tends to cut the grass on the thin side, but it's still fine. So if I had to give it a rating, I don't know, I might give it, say, an 8 out of 10. It does this job very well. The only thing is you do have to keep track of the boundary wire placement and make adjustments over time. So you may find that you're spending maybe the first full season while you're running this, making sure that the entire setup is as good as it can possibly be. Oh, I have to make an adjustment over there. I got to move this thing over here. I got to move this boundary wire back. I have to actually move dirt from this part of the yard to that part of the yard to flatten out this section over there. And so you're going to be doing, a fair amount of that on a realistic yard like this each weekend, just to make sure that this thing runs as fault-free as possible. So my hope is that by the end of this season, I'll have all those kinks sorted out, and then I'll be able to just set it and forget it. For the most part, it'll still get stuck from time to time. I still see it get stuck in rather obscure parts of the yard that it normally never gets stuck at. But maybe it approaches that section of the yard from a certain angle, or it finds like a little, tree stump. There's like a little teeny tiny tree stump in the yard, like right about there, that's almost buried but not quite, and it's just tall enough for the mower to get stuck on it. And it's far enough out in the yard that it's pointless to like run more boundary wire to make a loop around that. So you'll run into things like that, but those are really, in my view, relatively minor inconveniences for something that's basically mowing for you all the time and it never complains. So that's kind of my view of it. I figure based on how much it would cost to pay somebody to mow the lawn for you, especially in the region I live in, this will pay for itself in about 2 years. Okay, so if you consider that, I'd say it's pretty much worth the money. The installation itself, by the way, Again, going back to the boundary wire, you can pay someone to do it for a couple $100, but they may not do it very well. For instance, like if they don't have good familiarity with your yard, or even if they do and they install the wire and you find you need to make an adjustment to the boundary wire, and maybe the way they installed it, they just buried the wire everywhere. Then you have to go in and dig the wire up and then rebury it. So I installed all of this myself because I didn't want to pay someone else to screw it up when I could screw it up just fine on my own. So yeah, I think those are all the main features. The only other thing, sorry, there's one more thing about this that I really should fault it for. Husqvarna does like to market their Automowers as having a connectivity feature. And technically that's true. So the 315X and the 450X, they come with a 2G cellular card with 10 years of prepaid service on it. So in theory, you could connect that to your phone and you can control, all of the electronic functions through your phone. You can schedule when to mow, you can tell it to park, you can do all that cool stuff. The problem is it does it over 2G. And in the United States, Verizon doesn't have 2G service anymore. You can get a 3G upgraded card for it, but Verizon is sunsetting 3G at the end of this year, 2019. So really the connectivity feature, certainly in the United States, is kind of useless. It would be nice if they could give you a 4G card, or even at the very least a Wi-Fi card, because then you could connect it to your home Wi-Fi and then you don't have to worry about cellular service at all. But at this moment, as of summer 2019, they don't have that available. So I can't connect this to my phone, even though that's a big marketing, feature that they use for this Automower. So I just use, the keypad here manually whenever I need to. Yeah, so that's about it. Thanks for watching.